All right, so we're diving into some fascinating stuff today. Okiya Omtatah, the Kenyan activist. Well, he's been a real thorn in the side of governments for years, and now he's setting his sights on the presidency in 2027.
Oh yeah, he's aiming for the top job.
Exactly. He's gotten the nickname the People's Advocate, and for good reason, I'd say. We've got a whole bunch of articles and research here.
Hello, Stack, yeah.
And our deep dive today, it's all about trying to figure out if he can actually make this happen. Can he win?
That's the big question, isn't it? I think what's really interesting is that Omtatah isn't your typical politician. He spent his whole career kind of bucking the system, challenging things through these legal battles, fighting for all sorts of things.
Yeah, like what kinds of things?
Well, everything from protecting basic rights to making sure the government's actually using our money responsibly, that kind of thing.
Keeping them honest.
Exactly.
It's like he's been in training for this.
Yeah, you could say that.
And now he's saying he's going to bring that same energy, that same fighting spirit to the presidency. Right. He's talking about some really big reforms, tackling things like food security, making healthcare available for everyone, improving public services. It's
a bold vision, that's for sure.
It is. It's a bold vision.
And you know what? It's definitely attracting a lot of attention, especially from young Kenyans.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and the people who feel like they've been let down by the traditional politicians, the same old faces,
They're looking for something different.
Yeah, and they see Omtatah as a potential disruptor, someone who can really shake things up.
Someone who can actually bring about change. Yeah.
Exactly.
But here's the thing, and this is where it gets really interesting. Kenyan politics. It's a tough game, man. It takes a lot more than just a good message to win an election. We're talking about building these intricate networks, raising tons of money.
You need a machine.
Yeah, and that's something that Omtatah just doesn't seem to have at this point.
Right. Think of it this way, political machinery. It's the engine that drives campaigns in Kenya.
The engine.
Yeah, and it involves so many moving parts. Fundraising networks, campaign teams, media strategists, all working together to get someone elected. And historically, the winners have always had these well-oiled machines behind them.
So Omtatah is definitely facing an uphill battle here.
You could say that again.
But he doesn't seem fazed by it at all.
No, not really.
He's actually downplayed the need for all those billions of shillings.
Oh, wow.
Saying he's going to rely on the support of the people instead.
Huh. So that raises a really important question. Can grassroots enthusiasm actually translate into a win?
Yeah, can it actually translate into votes?
In a system that's always been dominated by, big money and powerful connections?
I wonder.
Yeah, it's something to think about.
And, that kind of leads us to this Lone Ranger image that Omtatah projects. He's always been willing to go it alone, take on the establishment head on.
He's not afraid of a fight.
No, he's not. And while that might appeal to some voters...
Oh, for sure.
It could also alienate some potential allies, the kind of people he might actually need to navigate the complexities of Kenyan politics.
It's a tricky balance, isn't it? Being the principled outsider, but also needing to work within the system to actually get things done.
It is, especially in a country like Kenya where, let's face it, political maneuvering and deal-making are just part of the game.
That's how it works.
So do you think all of Omtatah's, sharp-tongued criticism, the stuff that's made him so effective as an activist, is that going to help him or hurt him as he tries to move from critic to leader?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out, isn't it?
Yeah.
Could his past criticisms make it harder to build those relationships he needs to actually be an effective president? Or will that uncompromising stance be seen as a sign of strength and integrity?
It's hard to say.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
But one thing's for sure, Omtatah doesn't seem to have any major personal scandals hanging over his head.
Which is pretty rare in Kenyan politics, I'd say.
Oh, absolutely. That really reinforces this image of him as a reformer with principles, someone who's not in it for personal gain.
Yeah, definitely.
But even with a clean record, Kenyan politics can get pretty rough, and the closer we get to that election, the more scrutiny he's going to face,
Oh, absolutely. And there are already some controversies brewing, right? Like that whole thing with the Finance Bill 2024.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
So this bill was a huge deal. It introduced all sorts of changes to the tax system, and people had really strong opinions about it.
Some people were for it, Some were against it.
Exactly. Some people argued it was necessary. Others felt it was really unfair. And Omtatah, he filed a lawsuit against the bill before it was even passed.
Whoa. Okay.
Which some people saw as him trying to, obstruct the government's agenda.
Just being difficult.
Yeah, some people were questioning his motives, whether he was overstepping his bounds.
Checking out of line.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you have the whole SH-17 billion oil subsidy scandal.
Oh, right. I remember that.
Omtatah accused the Ministry of Energy of mishandling funds, basically saying they weren't being responsible with taxpayer money. And some people saw it as legitimate whistleblowing.
Raising the alarm.
Exactly. But others saw it as a political attack.
Trying to score points.
Yeah, it definitely added fuel to the fire.
It did. And of course, there's the whole thing with his constant criticism of government corruption, especially targeting President Ruto's administration.
Yeah, that's been a big theme.
He's been very vocal about it, accusing the government of not doing enough to tackle corruption, even suggesting that their efforts are more for show than substance.
And that message resonates with a lot of Kenyans.
Yeah.
People are fed up with corruption.
Oh, absolutely.
But it also puts Omtatah in a potentially divisive position.
Creating those divides.
Yeah, deepening those political fault lines. It's a classic dilemma for someone who's trying to shake things up. Do you play nice and risk being seen as part of the problem? Or do you go all out and risk alienating people you might need on your side?
It's a tough call.
It really is.
So, with all these controversies swirling around him, do you think Omtatah still has a chance?
Well, despite all the criticism, he's managed to maintain a pretty solid reputation for integrity. A lot of Kenyans see him as this vital watchdog, someone who's not afraid to hold the powerful accountable.
So he's got that going for him.
He does. But is it enough to make him a viable candidate for president? Can he turn that reputation into, broad appeal? Can he convince enough people that he's not just a critic, but a leader? Those are the big questions.
Yeah, those are the big questions.
And that's what we'll be digging into as we go through all this material.
As we explore all of this.
Try to figure out, what's really going on here.
The nuances, the complexities.
Exactly. And hopefully, get you thinking about all this too.
Make you thinking about it as well, yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny to think about, what if all those things we think are holding Omtatah back, like not having those traditional political connections,
right?
What if that actually turns out to be his biggest advantage?
That's interesting. How do you mean?
Well, we've been talking about how he's kind of an outsider, right? No real political machine backing him up.
Yeah.
And how that could be a big hurdle for him.
Right.
But what if it's actually his secret weapon,
I see what you're getting at.
He's not tied to all those power brokers, all the favors and backroom deals that come with that world.
So he's got more freedom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He can connect with voters in a way that feels genuine because he's not beholden to anyone.
He can just say what he really thinks.
Exactly. And in a country where people are pretty cynical about politics, tired of the same old game, that could be a really powerful message.
Yeah, like he's bypassing all the gatekeepers and going straight to the people.
Exactly. But let's be real for a second. Governing, that's a whole different animal than being an activist.
Oh, for sure. Much more complicated.
It's one thing to, rally people around a cause or challenge a law in court, but running a whole government, making tough decisions, compromises, dealing with all those competing interests and pressure.
And being in the spotlight constantly.
Right. Every move you make being scrutinized and analyzed.
Yeah, it's intense.
And we have to remember, Omtatah's never held elected office before.
Right.
So there are definitely legitimate questions about whether he's got the temperament for it, the experience,
The political savvy.
Yeah, it's kind of a gamble, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Betting on this outsider who says he's going to change things, but who also might not have what it takes to actually make it happen.
But like any gamble, high risk, high reward.
Right.
I mean, if he can somehow turn that grassroots support into actual votes.
And if he can get the right people around him, advisors who can help him navigate all that political stuff.
You might just be able to pull it off, It'd be a major upset.
It would be a huge upset.
But it's a big if, for sure.
Yeah, it is. And from what we've seen in these articles, there are no easy answers.
Not really. It's complicated.
They paint a picture of Omtatah that's got both strengths and weaknesses.
A mixed bag.
Which is, I guess, why we're doing this deep dive, right?
Yeah, exactly.
To try to understand all those nuances, go beyond just scratching the surface and really dig into the complexities of this whole thing.
And hopefully get you thinking about it in a different way, too.
Absolutely. So let's get back to some of those strengths for a minute. We talked about how he appeals to young people, people who are kind of disillusioned with the establishment. But what is it about his message that's really resonating with them?
One thing that stands out is his focus on issues that directly affect people's daily lives.
Yeah, stuff that matters.
Like food security, for example.
Oh, that's huge.
He's been very vocal about supporting small farmers, improving infrastructure.
Making sure everyone has access to affordable, nutritious food.
Exactly.
And that's a huge issue in Kenya, especially with the droughts they've been having and food prices going up.
Absolutely. It's something that's really hitting people hard.
And it's not just empty words from him, right?
No, he's not just talking about it.
He's actually connecting with people on a personal level.
Sharing stories.
I remember reading about him visiting this rural community where people were literally going days without food.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking.
It really was. And he didn't just show up and offer sympathy. He actually did something about it.
Like what?
Helping to organize food drives, working with local leaders to find long-term solutions, you know?
Wow.
So it's not just talk with him, it's action.
And that's what people are looking for, right?
Yeah, someone who walks the walk.
They're tired of empty promises from politicians.
Tired of the same old song and dance.
They want someone who's actually going to do something.
Someone who's going to deliver.
And Omtatah's got a track record of doing just that.
Let's talk about that track record for a second.
Okay.
We've mentioned that he doesn't have experience in elected office.
Right. No formal experience.
But he's had some pretty major wins as an activist, right?
Oh, absolutely. And not just small wins either. We're talking about taking on some of the most powerful institutions in Kenya and coming out on top.
Give us some examples. What kind of wins are we talking about?
Well, there was that case he brought against the government a few years back, challenging the legality of that big infrastructure project.
Oh, yeah, the new highway.
That's the one. There was a lot of controversy surrounding it.
A lot of people were against it, right?
Yeah, people were worried about the environmental impact.
You know, what it would do to the communities living there.
Yeah, potential displacement.
And there were also concerns about how the whole bidding process was handled.
A lack of transparency.
Exactly. So Omtatah steps in.
And what does he do?
Files a lawsuit.
That's right. Arguing that the government had basically violated the Constitution.
By not consulting with the communities that would be affected.
Yeah, and by giving the contract to a company with a shady past.
So what happened? Did he win?
He did. The court ruled in his favor, put the whole project on hold, forced the government to basically go back to the drawing board.
So he shut the whole thing down.
He did. Huge victory for environmental activists and for anyone who cares about government accountability.
That's pretty impressive.
Right. And that's not all.
There's more.
Oh, yeah. Plenty more. He successfully challenged a law that restricted freedom of assembly, won a case that protected the rights of refugees.
He was busy.
He was. He even went up against the president himself in a case involving misuse of public funds.
Wow, he's not afraid of anyone.
Nope, no matter how powerful.
And that kind of fearlessness, that's got to be a big part of his appeal.
It is. People see him as someone who stands up for what he believes in, even when it's risky.
He's a fighter.
Exactly.
So going back to our original question, can he turn all this activist energy into electoral success?
It's still a big question mark, honestly. We just don't know.
There's no way to predict it.
Right. But his track record of challenging the status quo, his ability to connect with people on issues they care about, his commitment to fighting for what he believes in, all of that could work in his favor.
Yeah, it could.
But there are still some major obstacles he's going to have to overcome.
Like we talked about, the financial hurdle.
The money, yeah.
Building a strong campaign team.
Navigating that whole political landscape in Kenya.
Not to mention the possibility of more scandals or controversies popping up as we get closer to the election.
Things could get messy.
Yeah, Kenyan politics can be pretty unpredictable.
Things change fast.
So it's going to be a fascinating race to watch, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And one that could have a major impact on the future of the country.
A lot riding on this one.
Definitely.
It's crazy to think that even if Omtatah doesn't win, you know, just him running for president is already kind of shaking things up.
I know what you mean.
It's making people rethink what they want from their leaders.
Right, like what qualities are important.
It's like he's raised the bar, you know, challenging the way things have always been done.
He's showing people that it's okay to expect more from their leaders.
Yeah, to hold them accountable.
And it's inspiring people to get involved, too, especially young people.
So many young people are getting into politics because of Omtatah. It's really something.
It's like he started a fire, you know,
Yeah.
and it's spreading.
I like that, a fire.
People are starting to believe that change is actually possible.
And that they can be part of it.
Exactly.
So let's just say, hypothetically, he wins, right? Omtatah becomes president. What could we actually expect to see? What would change?
Well, if he sticks to what he's been saying,
if he follows through on his promises,
we could see a real shift in priorities. Like, he's talked a lot about putting people first, focusing on those basic needs.
Like food, healthcare, education.
Exactly. Those fundamental things.
And of course, he's been really vocal about fighting corruption, which is a huge problem in Kenya.
Oh, yeah, it's a big one.
He's talked about strengthening those anti-corruption institutions, making things more transparent, and holding those corrupt officials accountable no matter who they are.
No matter how powerful.
But wouldn't he face a ton of pushback, from the people who benefit from the way things are now?
Oh, definitely. It wouldn't be easy at all.
They wouldn't just let him change things without a fight.
Not a chance. But that's where his outsider status could actually help him.
You think so?
He's not part of that system,
Yeah.
He doesn't owe anyone any favors.
He's not playing their game.
Exactly. So he might be more willing to shake things up, make those tough decisions that others have been avoiding.
Take on the big guys.
But it's a risky strategy.
How so?
He could alienate too many people, He'd need to be smart about it, build alliances where he can...
pick his battles.
Exactly. And even with the best intentions, there's no guarantee he could deliver on all those promises.
It's a lot easier said than done, right?
Governing is tough. There are always unexpected problems, things you can't control.
Limited resources, competing priorities.
And don't forget about outside pressures too. International organizations, the global economy, all that stuff can have a big impact.
Yeah, it's not all up to him.
So even if he wins, it doesn't mean Kenya's problems will just vanish overnight.
It's not a magic solution.
But it could be a turning point, a shift in the right direction.
A renewed focus on what really matters.
Exactly.
It's pretty exciting to think about the possibilities though, right? Both the potential for positive change and the risks.
It really is. And this whole thing just highlights how important it is for everyone to be engaged.
To be informed.
To pay attention to what's going on, scrutinize the candidates.
Ask tough questions.
Make your voice heard.
Because ultimately, the future of Kenya is in the hands of its people.
Well said.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Okiya Omtatah and his presidential ambitions.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
We looked at his strengths, his weaknesses, his chances of actually winning, and what it could all mean for Kenya.
We went through all the material you gave us.
Unpacked the key points.
Hopefully gave you some new things to think about.
But we don't want the conversation to end here.
No way.
We'd love to hear what you think.
What are your thoughts on all this? Do you think Omtatah has a real shot at winning?
What are the biggest challenges he faces?
What are the biggest opportunities?
Share your thoughts with us, on social media, email us.
We're always eager to hear from you.
And as always, stay curious, keep learning, and keep diving deep.